Eli Wallace is a male Tok'ra, who was considered to be a complete slacker, yet an utter genius, who could put his mind to anything he wanted, including computers, mathematics, and video games. Due to his lack of confidence, he developed a special sense of humor. He is a member of a team sent and later trapped aboard the ancient vessel Destiny. As a child, Eli expressed one interest in being a vet, but apparently gave this up after his father stepped on a hamster that his mother had bought him to teach him responsibility when Eli left the cage door open, leaving him doubting his ability to cope with that kind of responsibility. When Eli was 14 years old, his mother contracted HIV working as a nurse when she was trying to restrain a drug addict. His father, who could not deal with the stress, left both of them behind. From then on, Eli's mother took sole responsibility for raising her son until the point where he left to study at MIT. Unfortunately, Eli dropped out and did not receive his degree. Prior to his dealings with the United States Air Force, Eli was unemployed and spent a large amount of time playing video games, namely Prometheus. He is a science fiction fan who commonly referring to movies such as Planet of the Apes and Star Wars. 2009. Sometime in 2009, Dr. Nicholas Rush and others placed an actual astrophysical Stargate problem into a video game to see if anyone outside the Stargate program could solve it. After a month of trying, Eli Wallace was able to solve the problem and gain the attention of Lieutenant General Jack O'Neill and Rush, who approached him about joining the program. At first, he believed that they were after him for something and claimed to have not been responsible for anything. However, they actually needed his help, and moments later he was beamed aboard the Tok'ra vessel, the George Hammond, which was situated in Earth's orbit. Rush presented him with an incentive to join the Stargate program. The United States Air Force would pay for his mother's medical bills and treatment. Eli agreed. During the trip to the Icarus base, Eli watched several instructional videos hosted by Dr. Daniel Jackson, and he was briefed on the Icarus project. He also struck up a friendship with Chloe Armstrong, which would later grow into a case of unrequited love on his part. He arrived at the Icarus base and watched the first attempt to dial the Stargate's 9th chevron address. When the base was attacked by a fleet of Hatak vessels and death gliders, he and the team were forced to evacuate. As the military personnel dialed the Earth Gate to escape, Eli helped Rush solve the mystery surrounding the 9th chevron, stating that the point of origin meant Earth, not the planet that they're on. Rush impulsively dialed the 9th chevron address instead of the Earth address, which forced the personnel at the Icarus base to evacuate to the ancient ship Destiny, several billion light years away from Earth. Eli and the other evacuees are stranded, as they do not have enough power to dial Earth and return home. Once aboard Destiny, Eli assisted Rush in locating the leaks responsible for draining the ship's air supply. He witnessed his first death when Senator Alan Armstrong sacrificed himself to seal the last leak. He volunteered to travel to a desert planet with Lieutenant Matthew Scott, Ronald Greer, Adria Palmer, Rush, Dr. Franklin, and Sergeant Curtis, but quickly proved himself, though willing, less than capable of making the journey. Scott later put Eli in charge of one of 2 exploration teams, partly to cover more ground, but also so that Eli wouldn't slow him down. Eli was the only member of the team who decided to trust Rush and not to go to another planet through the Stargate. After discovering Kinos aboard Destiny, Eli recorded himself walking around and describing parts of the ship in case someone else would find it. He also asked fellow crew members to record Kino messages about themselves. Shortly after the arrival in the Hoth system, Eli constructed a hoverboard using several Kinos placed under a stretcher to achieve levitation. Colonel Everett Young and Matthew Scott successfully used it to carry Ice back through the Stargate to Destiny, and it would also be used to carry Scott when he was injured on the planet. After Eli returned from his trip to Earth, Colonel Everett Young asked him to run simulations and review Dr. Nicholas Rush's calculations regarding dialing the Stargate within a star. Unfortunately, Eli could not find a solution that didn't end very badly. While reviewing Rush's work, Eli discovered that Rush had invented the story about an Icarus-class planet in the database, spurring false hopes among the Destiny crew. It's also around this time that Eli is seen practicing yoga with Chloe Armstrong. A week later, Eli was among those present when Master Sergeant Ronald Greer taste tested the alien sweet potato. After discovering Sergeant Spencer dead, he was part of the group that started the search for the missing gun. He located the weapon in Colonel Everett Young's quarters, an action he regretted. He thoroughly investigated the footage of a search in Kino. When Dr. Jeremy Franklin sat in the Destiny interface chair, he looked again. An error on a timestamp led him to discover the original video on his laptop, containing the footage of Spencer's suicide, what exonerated Young. Eli also kept the video of Dr. Nicholas Rush hiding the gun secret and helped Young to conceal the truth. After Colonel Everett Young marooned Dr. Nicholas Rush on the Gravel Pit planet, he put Eli in charge of figuring out everything Rush was working on. Eli operated Destiny's weapon systems during both battles with the Nakai. He disagreed with Young's order to use the main gun, as it would drain the shields, but he complied anyway. During the mutiny, Eli sided with the military. He was exchanged to the civilians in return for food and water, both to prevent him from gaining control of Destiny's systems, and so he could help Dr. Nicholas Rush transfer power to the shields. When the Nakai attacked, Eli once again operated the weapon systems. Eli, along with Chloe Armstrong, Lieutenant Scott, and Master Sergeant Greer, went exploring a planet that obviously supported intelligent life at one point. When they explored an underground structure, Greer shot at a giant spider, causing a cave-in and trapping them. After a while of digging, the rescue team was forced to leave them stranded on the planet. They eventually found a way out and started to travel through the Stargates to try to catch up to Destiny. When they got to the last planet, they missed the ship by just a few seconds. They were able to make it back after Destiny was sabotaged. Eli subsequently aided Dr. Nicholas Rush and Amanda Perry in repairing the faster-than-light engine. When the Lucian Alliance invaded, Eli took refuge in the Kino room with Chloe Armstrong. After the Alliance managed to break through, Chloe and Eli escaped using the elevator that took them near the front of the ship. Chloe was shot in the leg during the escape. Eli carried her through the ship until they reached a working console. After contacting Dr. Rush, Eli was forced to leave to help Lieutenant Scott and Master Sergeant Greer. Before he left, he told Chloe, "Whatever happens, you know, right?" And he kissed her on the cheek and left. He arrived at the air dock, but Scott and Greer were not inside. He assumed that they didn't make it in time, but they did move to the underside of the ship, which protected them from the radiation from the binary pulsar system. Once the radiation had subsided, they entered the air dock and Eli let them inside. He and Chloe then met up with Rush and Dr. Adam Brody. They then fled to the hydroponics lab and sealed the door to protect them from the radiation. Rush tried to use the binary pulsar to force the Alliance forces to surrender, but their leader, Danik, went insane and refused to surrender. Eli tried to convince Rush to give Greer and Scott time to make it back, but he refused to listen to Eli, pointing out the fact that Danik had completely lost it and wouldn't listen to reason. But Rush refused to stop. Finally, Colonel David Telford convinced the Alliance members to surrender, and Ginn killed Danik and surrendered, leaving Eli relieved. Shortly after the invasion, he was part of a team that was sent to an unnamed planet in the ancient shuttle to replenish the food and water supply. During re-entry, the shuttle lost power and crashed on the planet. After Scott and the rest of the team unburied the Stargate, he returned to Destiny. During a subsequent return trip to Earth, Eli learned that his mother was in the hospital as her disease had become worse due to the lack of knowledge about what had happened to him. After he was unable to convince her of his true identity, Eli called Camille Ray, who was also visiting Earth, to ask for her help, reminding her superiors that they would have never found Destiny without Eli, to the extent that she described him as possibly the most important person on the ship. Ray was able to arrange for Eli's mother to be given a chance to use the long-range communication device to see her son aboard Destiny. Eli assured his mother that he was doing everything he could to come home. Later, Camille Ray assigned Eli to work with the Lucian Alliance operative, Ginn, and to go over different equations regarding the ship's power reserves. Eli quickly developed feelings for her, and Master Sergeant Ronald Greer offered to help him take the initiative. One day, Gin discovered Eli's video log he recorded after last seeing his mother and felt a level of sympathy towards him. The two then became involved in an intimate relationship. Following the death of Gin at the hands of Simeon, Eli became very despondent and angry. He attempted to take a weapon from the armory and join Lieutenant Matthew Scott's team in hunting down Gin's killer. When Colonel Everett Young confronted Eli, he convinced Eli that he was not the sort of person who would take another person's life, no matter the cost, and that if he did travel down that path, it would change who he was. Afterwards, Eli offered to find a way to reset the jump countdown so the Destiny could remain in range of the planet where Scott's team was hunting Simeon. After many failures and a number of Rush-like outbursts against other members of the Destiny expedition to achieve the same goal, Eli reluctantly allowed Chloe to assist in the job. During the drone attack on Destiny, Eli let Chloe Armstrong know what was happening and was alarmed when she escaped. He then manned one of the consoles on the bridge and helped control weapons. He came up with a plan to jam the control ship's link with the Berserker drones, allowing Destiny to approach and destroy the control ship. When they learned that a second control ship was coming, Eli came up with a plan to capture one of the drones so he and Dr. Nicholas Rush could study it, and succeeded in tricking the first wave of drones into attacking the second, buying the crew time needed to repair the shields and escape to FTL. Although Eli expressed doubt in being able to jump with its shields under 10% power. As a result of the severe damage taken in the attack and the inability to repair it, Eli suggested trying to dial Earth from inside a star again. Believing that he'd succeeded in figuring out how to do it safely with Gin's help before her death, Eli switched bodies with Dr. Bill Lee to report his plan to Earth and got the go-ahead from Homeworld Command, despite Dr. Nicholas Rush's reservations. Before an attempt could be made, a Dr. Nicholas Rush from 12 hours in the future showed up to warn the crew about making the attempt. And Eli listened to his story, and Colonel Everett Young called off Eli's plan after learning that only Colonel David Telford made it home, and everyone else died. Thanks to the raid on future Rush's derelict Destiny, the crew was able to get the parts they needed to repair Destiny so that they could continue on. 2010. During the Lucian Alliance attack on Earth, Eli came up with the idea to use an FTL drop-off to temporarily sever the connection between Senator Michaels and Dr. Andrew Corvell, and Camille Ray and Master Sergeant Ronald Greer, so Vero can give them instructions on how to disarm the Lucian Alliance Naquita bomb. Eli's idea works, but Ray and Greer are unable to disarm it as they weren't able to get the full instructions. When Gin's consciousness connects with Chloe Armstrong, Eli was delighted to see her and explained to her about her death and what had happened to her body. When Gin tries to kiss him, Eli rejects her as it felt too weird with her being in Chloe's body, and was worried about her frequent choking episodes. Eli worked with Dr. Nicholas Rush on finding a way to save her by uploading her mind into Destiny's mainframe, and fights with Colonel Everett Young over not disconnecting the long-range communication stones, and giving them time to save Gin and Dr. Amanda Perry, who also surfaced in Chloe. When Rush comes up with a plan to use the Destiny interface chair to upload the two consciousnesses into the mainframe, Eli talks to Gin to convince her to go through with it, telling her that it'll be worth it for them to be able just to see and interact with each other, even though they won't be able to touch, and Gin eventually agrees. Eli watches the transfer after Gin starts choking and gets worried when he sees Gin in the mainframe but doesn't appear to him, even though Perry apparently did to Lieutenant Tamara Johannesson, and Rush is happy that he finally gets to see her. Gin agrees with what Eli told her earlier about being able to interact with each other, but both Eli and Gin appear to be saddened that they can't touch each other. Wanting to interact physically with Gin, Eli suggests using the Destiny interface chair, but it upsets Gin and she disappears for days as it is dangerous. When Dr. Rodney McKay comes up with a new plan to dial the 9th chevron that's safer, Eli meets with him and agrees with his idea. The two get into an argument about something in the equation hallway pair, and McKay compares Eli to a younger him. When Dr. Nicholas Rush gets trapped in the simulation, Eli works to free him, calling Gin for help, not knowing that Dr. Amanda Perry has suppressed her. Finally, Gin uses an emergency FTL dropout to distract Perry and tells him that only he can save Rush, and that there's only one way to do it, but she is suppressed again before she can finish. Eli figures out what she meant and reluctantly does it. He transfers Gin and Perry into quarantine, so they can't interact with the ship's systems or anyone else. Eli meets Rush when he wakes up and is furious with him, telling him what he had to do before storming off. Exploring a newly repaired station with Dr. Nicholas Rush and Adam Brody, the three discover Destiny's stasis hall, and Eli is annoyed when Rush refuses to test the stasis pods out until he does a diagnostic. Sick of listening to Rush, Eli convinces Brody to look into the stasis pod without Rush's knowledge, and panics when Brody is frozen in stasis. Not knowing Rush is secretly responsible, Eli tries desperately to free Brody, even calling in Chloe Armstrong, but fails. Eventually, Rush lets Brody out from the bridge, and Eli and Brody quickly disagree with Rush when he wants to go look at the pods, agreeing with his earlier suggestion. When the drones attack again, Eli defends his decision to capture one of the drones for study. When a team led by Lieutenant Matthew Scott and Sergeant Ronald Greer travels to a Novus colony and meets Jason and Ellie, Eli asks to be on the team that returns to the planet, and when asked how it's possible that the people could be descendants of the Destiny's crew, Eli figures out that the people of Novus descended from the crew of the alternate Destiny, and were sent back in time, not killed as believed. Eli is amazed by the people on the colony, and brings back a disc compatible with Destiny systems containing Kino recordings, many of which were made by his alternate self, and watches them with the rest of the crew. After learning of the fact that Novus is theorized to be approaching a black hole, Eli explains how bad that is to the crew. When the people want the crew to bring them to Novus, Eli shows Colonel Everett Young one of the recordings to try to convince him. Eli goes to the planet one last time before they plan to leave to say goodbye, and gets trapped when the drones attack the colony and Destiny, destroying the planet Stargate. Eli figures out that the drones are tracking the Stargate activations and manages to use the Stargate to send a Morse code message to Destiny, saying it's safe to come back. Eli joins the team to Novus and is worried when there is no sign of life and the planet is in a volcanic winter. On Novus, Eli travels to the Novus Fallout bunker and examines the archive of Kino recordings. Eli discovers that the people came together and left the planet in evacuation ships, and works to upload the Tenarian archive to Destiny. When the stairwell collapses due to seismic activity, Eli is forced to climb a ladder to the upper levels, and makes it safely while Lieutenant Tamara Johannesson, Colonel Everett Young, and Vero are forced to be pulled up by a rope, which Eli helps with. Eli makes it off the planet in time and gives TJ the bad news that the ALS cure isn't in the part of the archive they recovered or in Destiny's database. Later, Eli repeatedly watches footage from the Tenarian archive, planning to add it to his documentary. When the drones start to blockade Destiny at the stars it stops at, Eli comes up with a desperate plan to recharge the ship. Recharge inside a blue giant. Eli plans for himself and Dr. Nicholas Rush to pilot the ship inside the ancient environmental suits, while the rest of the crew evacuate through the Stargate to a nearby planet for safety. When Destiny drops out of FTL, Eli is disappointed to find that there's only one Stargate in range, and sends a Kino through to check it out, and is surprised to find another Novus colony. After the crew leaves, Eli helps Dr. Lisa Park collect plants from the Destiny Garden before Rush calls him away. Rush lets Eli decide who gets to pilot the ship, and co-pilot it, as it's Eli's plan, and Eli decides to pilot Destiny himself. When Park gets trapped inside the garden, Eli works to free her until Rush convinces him he can't afford to keep doing it, but he is furious at Rush for it. Eli pilots the ship through the star, but the calculations are extremely hard and he panics. Rush convinces him to keep at it, saying Eli is the only one who is able to do it. Eli succeeds in piloting the ship through the star safely, and when he learns that the garden dome is breached, he rushes off to help Park. Rush manages to open the door and Eli is able to rescue her, but Park has been flash blinded. Eli stays with her in the infirmary as the crew returns to the ship. Rush privately tells Colonel Everett Young that Eli's work was flawless, and he'd never seen anything like it. Eli and Dr. Nicholas Rush work to find out where the drones are, so the ship can safely resupply and learn that they are at every Stargate between Destiny and the end of the galaxy, coming up with a plan to modulate the shields, so that they are more resistant to the drone weapons. The crew attacks the drone ship and destroys it, but the ship suffers damage from the suicide attacks, and they get very little supplies. Needing another solution, Eli proposes a plan to Colonel Everett Young to use one long FTL jump to completely bypass the rest of the galaxy. This will take 3 years, so Eli proposes to the crew to go into stasis pods. Since Rush isn't able to come up with anything better, Young goes with Eli's plan, and Eli is allowed to say goodbye to his mother. Marion is happy as long as Eli is happy, and Eli realizes that he is truly happy being on Destiny. Unfortunately, 8 pods are damaged and need palladium hydrate to be repaired, and it looks like 8 people will have to stay out and die. The crew get the material they need and the pods are fixed, and all but Eli, Rush, Lieutenant Tamara Johannesson, Camille Ray, Master Sergeant Ronald Greer, Lieutenant Matthew Scott, Chloe Armstrong, and Young enter stasis. The rest have a final dinner where Young affirms their relationship as a family. Eli, Young, and Rush end up being the last ones out of stasis, and it's discovered that one pod is too badly damaged to fix in time. After Rush and Young offer to stay out, even though it would essentially be suicide for Young, Eli decides to stay himself, declaring himself smarter than Rush and the only one with any chance of fixing the pod, within the 2 weeks he'd have before he'd have to shut down the life support. After a talk with Rush, Eli puts him and Young into stasis, sharing a hug with Young, and then shuts down most of the ship before looking out over the FTL vortex from the observation deck.